Welcome to the Life Transform podcast. I'm Simcha.
And I'm Sarah, and we are here chatting, sharing real life, real stories,
Deep truths, all about living a life transformed.
It's all about how God impacts our life and how we're changed and how our life becomes a significant impact in the lives of other people.
We're going to be here every week for this season.
So make sure that you subscribe and join the journey.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Simcha here
With Sarah.
And today we are joining you from a hot, sunny, as always, Middle East. And we're not that excited about it, are we?
No, going into summer, unfortunately, 6 months of heat, humidity
Nope.
where we live.
Nope.
It's happening, whether we like it or
I'm in
not.
denial.
Actually, the fields that we look at turned. It seemed within kind of 24, 48 hours from this beautiful green to this yellow.
Yeah.
Brown.
Totally. It's a very sad moment when that happens. And it is a moment. It literally seems to happen at the click of a
Overnight.
finger.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about starting new chapters and what have you got to say about that?
New career moves. Well, I mean, for you have started a new career, a new chapter in your life.
Yeah, it's so weird, isn't it?
What are you doing that's new?
Well, COVID did a lot, didn't it? And one of the things that happened to me was just before COVID, it felt like and seemed like I was finally, when you're at the start line of a race and you go from like the kneeling down position on your marks and then you go to get set and you raise your bum in the air and you're ready to just like power off and go. I was in that position and I was like, I was taking those breaths, my muscles were all ready to go. And I was like, any second now, the gun's going to go and I'm going to go powering down. And then COVID hit and it was like, yeah, no. And it was a very difficult season because I was totally focused, aiming and dreaming and very committed to the direction that I had felt it was going in and seemed to be going in. It wasn't like I was making it up. It did indicate, there were indications that it was going that way. And obviously COVID just stopped everything in its tracks. It's been massively damaging to people in the arts, in ministry, people who depend on traveling. It's, people whose careers and ministries and life callings, whatever, are dependent on those things. It's just killed it. And for a few months, at the beginning, I remember back in our naive moments saying, oh, it'll only be a few weeks and then we'll be back to normal. Do you remember that? I remember you and I standing outside the house we're in now, and it was March, and we were saying, well, I think by May we'll be back to normal. And here we are, a full year after that May, still not back to normal. And I think first few months I was very kind of excited about it still being able to materialize, but very quickly became evident that it wasn't. And I went through a whole season and process of putting it down and actually trying to make peace with it and deal with the disappointment and not let it turn to anything bitter. But it was actually really amazing with hindsight to look back, because I was already offering coaching in interiors to people, and it was the only thing I was coaching in that I didn't have a qualification to back up. So I thought way before COVID, I'll just buy a course and just slowly make my way through it and just have that certificate as a backup. So then I'm fully qualified in everything. And over COVID, I just did a bunch of this course because I had time. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't going anywhere. Nothing was progressing. And I just dusted it off. And by the end of the year, 2020, I qualified as an interior designer. And it kind of all came to a head with God really speaking to me about closing that chapter of my life. And it's not necessarily, I've come to understand, it's not necessarily that chapter is shut, finished, done, finished, dealt with, but it being the main focus and my job, in quote commas, is that chapter is over, and he's moved me completely into a different zone and a different focus and a different career essentially. And it's it's been very interesting to try and rediscover that balance with everything. So that's my little shift.
Yeah, I think I mean, I experienced similar devastation, smashed, I would say, my career, thanks to COVID-19 and a global pandemic.
Kill a lot,
it really killed it, yeah, because I think 2019 was like the most massive year I'd done in terms of trips and reach and projects and work and an album, flying. And I was just all full force ahead, and then everything stopped, which initially was fun, but then it got, you know, more and more evident. Like you were saying, I remember that conversation, you know, hey, this could be over quick. And
we had a friend who also had his trips booked for May, and we were like, well, he's still going, so it'll be fine.
Exactly. And you know what God did was he brought me back to the things that he had already told me, that I was, quote unquote, so busy doing these other great things that I wasn't focusing on, and changed my direction. I'm out on this foolish mission, foolish in the eyes of the world.
It's amazing.
To bring revival to the Middle East.
No biggie. No pressure.
Small mission impossible. Singing in Arabic, learning to sing in Arabic, and developing a project called The Invitation. And what's happened to me is that I have understood that there is this mindset that we can live in, you know, when it comes to new seasons and these transitions, that is kind of from earth to heaven. And it lingers back on the things that we know and on the things that we were doing and that we love. And then you can flip the perspective. I think you've spoken about this, you know, in previous podcasts as well, just flipping it upside down. And if we live from an eternity towards earth mindset, what I mean by that is that, you know, I found myself many times in this kind of change. What, you know, when you start a new career or a new project or a new direction in life, you know, my pragmatic mind calculates efficiency, effectiveness, you know, ability to carry things out. And I've really had to call myself on that I cannot be God's economist. Yeah. I cannot judge for God, right? Not very good at numbers, hashtag. I cannot judge for God how he chooses to spend the resources that he has, and who with and why, you know. And COVID brought me from a place of quote unquote impacting masses to one person at a time, you know, for hours. And I was looking at that and I thought, you know, I cannot judge for God. And it is what he does. He uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. And what that means for me is taking on something that A, is completely impossible, you know, within times of resources, finances, all these different things. And B, doesn't make a lot of sense in the worldly wisdom. Only in the kingdom does what I'm doing make sense. And I think that that's been the main thing is, you know, we talked a lot in season 1 about surrender and pure heart and these things. I think this season it's been for me about stepping out, about being proactive. I love what you were sharing. You know, you went out there and you took the course. You took a step, even in what would be a season of inaction, movement. You took this initiative, and I think that I found myself kind of having to do that myself, shift my mindset towards something new. You know, when you're going to start something new, you have to let go of the past. When you're saying yes to something, you know what you're saying no to. And that was probably my biggest challenge. Was I was trying to calculate for God what made sense. And in my
never works
in my economy of like, well, God. But it's been incredible. I'll tell you why, because I know that there is new ground out there and there are more breakthroughs, and becoming available for that is this adventure that we live with God. And so when we are stopped in our tracks, or when we are led towards a new start or a new career, there is this kind of lingering and feeling of the past. But I feel like we can turn our perspective and look at it as an adventure and as an opportunity. And now I see that God has got me going in such different directions than I was before, even in terms of who I'm going to, you know, the people I'm going to. But it's like, okay, there's new ground. There are new opportunities. There's new crazy to go towards with him. And that's exhilarating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the picture that I've kind of been thinking a lot about is it's like those scales, the old fashioned scales where you weigh stuff and you have like all the different sized little weights that you put on one side, and you have to try and get these things even. And I think, you know, for me, and I think also for you, we've always had lots of things going on. And I think what's happened is the distribution has changed. It's not that all of them are necessarily being completely removed, which is what I originally thought. I'm very black and white, all or nothing. So if God is closing a chapter, that means that's it. It's removed. It's finished. I must burn all my books and get rid of all my CDs, and just that's at the end. But it's not necessarily the case. It's just that maybe that part of my life is becoming a smaller weight, and there's a bigger thing being added in to redistribute the weight across the two things, or the 75 million things that we juggle on a daily basis. But yeah, I mean, this is a really good segue into today's topic, which is to do with ministry versus professionalism. And I think it's really funny that, you know, you started out with this very high flying career and then ended up in a ministry. And I did not do that. I've been very much focused on ministry for a long time. And now the flip side is happening to me with this crossover in the middle with us both together. But tell us a bit about your experience of the two worlds that you've been in.
Well, I mean, yeah, I started out never thinking or wanting, ever desiring to be in ministry. This was kind of a big big one in my life. I come from a family of working people, business owners. I married into a business owning family. So this has kind of just really been ingrained into me, and also my family, and it's what I love. I love business. I love work. I love kind of very, very high professional environment. I thrived in it. It was brilliant for me. And, you know, God about, 12 years ago now, probably, you know, caused this huge shift, earthquake level, tsunami level shift in my life, and moved me in kind of this other world that I hadn't been in. I'd never experienced before, world of ministry. And it's very interesting because I think that God has allowed me to use a lot of things that I learned in this world and kind of apply them all into this world. But I think that it's also caused me to see certain things in certain ways that, you know, are maybe not necessarily as helpful. So, yeah, I think this is a really good kind of tension to talk about between like our ministry work, our ministry life, even just as a professional, what my you know, how that crosses over versus, you know, life in the work environment, in the work world, where faith is not a consideration and relationships in faith are not a consideration, and, you know, what that kind of looked like.
Yeah, I think something that you said a few minutes ago is something that I have really battled with in this transition that I've made from going from ministry into the secular workplace, which is I never wanted to be in ministry. It was never an aim in my life in any way, shape or form. And I was raised in a family that was in ministry. You know, my parents were in full-time ministry my whole life. And my dad did work alongside of that. He wasn't always necessarily full-time, but it was definitely part of life. And I think maybe my desire to never be in ministry came because I lived in it and I saw the, you know, underside, if you like, the reality of what that can really be like. And it wasn't ever something I wanted. So, but the thing that I have battled with the most is, you know, when you're in ministry, it's really easy to see the eternal significance of what you're doing. It's really easy to feel like you're partnering with heaven on a daily basis in whatever you're doing. And I think that has been the biggest brain frying moment is, how could God want to move me from a space that is dealing with individuals and groups and small groups and discipling and all to do with eternal value into a workspace that is making big posh houses pretty for rich people? And that has no eternal significance. They can't take the house with them when they go. How do you bridge those gaps? And I'm sure, someone who's working in, like logistics or, a cafe or whatever the career might be, it's hard to find that value of eternal significance that you're doing on a daily basis when you're not in ministry. So how do you juggle that?
I think that's brilliant. We're here in Israel, so we get to lean on Hebrew, which is the original language of the Bible and the language we'll be speaking in heaven. No, not really. But Hebrew is incredible if you are able to kind of understand the context of the Bible in Hebrew. It opens up a whole new world of understanding of what God means, because
it brings culture with it. It brings a whole thing with
culture,
it.
But also the way the Hebrew language is built. It's just quick 30-second grammar lesson here. We have roots of words, so it's typically a three letters that are a root of a word, and a lot of words are built on that root. By conjugating it essentially, and so into kind of different frames.
Like you talked about that with the word Shabbat being from
Shevet. Exactly. And when we were talking about rest, Shabbat, which is to sit, but also to rest. So sitting and resting, it all originating from the same root. And so in this connection with the word work, we have that same thing happen again.
Yeah. And
the word for work in Hebrew is avodah, which it's just, that's the word avodah. But in the Bible, the first time the word worship is mentioned, okay? Now, quick quiz. If you're listening to this, when was the first time that the word worship is mentioned in the Bible? I'll give you 10 seconds.
No, 3.
3 seconds. You're hard.
If they don't know, then they don't know.
So the first time the word worship in your English Bible is mentioned is when Abraham tells Isaac, we're going to go worship God on Mount Moriah. The problem you have out there is that you're reading your Bible in English. It's very unfortunate.
Or whatever language
you're reading it in, but you're not reading it in Hebrew. If you were reading your Bible in Hebrew, you would find not the word worship. The word worship doesn't exist until like the Psalms.
Yeah.
Rather, that word is avodah. That word is work. So when Abraham is telling Isaac, let us go and worship God, it's in the context of the word that we have today for work.
Yeah.
So we see that in the Bible, worship and work are in that context. Essentially, that work is a sacrifice. Yeah. And so that's incredible to think about that.
Yeah.
That when you look at your work, secular work, or the majority of the people, out there that are believers should be, hopefully, are not in ministry. Hopefully you're out there working. It is very, very valuable and super significant that you're out there in your secular career, and that your work is as worship unto the Lord. And when we can understand that our work and our worship are not separate. Our work and our ministry, they're not separate. They're one and the same. And wherever God has put you, he's put you there with a purpose and a design for his kingdom, which means that as bearers and carriers of the Holy Spirit, wherever we're going, we're bringing the Spirit of God with us. Whoever we're speaking with, whoever we're with. And I'm not saying, this is like bombard people with evangelism and overtly, I'm just saying by being a follower of Yeshua, of Christ, of Jesus, and going into these places, that's what he told us to be. He told us to be salt. Mm-hmm. You know what happens if you have too much salt in one place? It gets so salty you cannot eat that food. So it was about going out into the highways and the byways. And let's face it, that's how we do that in our world today. We go out to work. We go out into those relationships. We go out into those places.
Yeah, it's so good to remember that. I love that. I remember the first time I clocked that word in the Bible and what it meant in the context, and just being so blown away about how work and worship were the same word. But I think something that I've definitely come across here in Israel, but also in the UK when I lived there, and I'm sure it's the same in lots of places, is when you're a believer, there is a huge amount of pressure that there is more value in ministry than there is in work. And surely, I mean, even I remember having people say to me, you know, well, when are you going to get a real job? And it's like, you know, there are many people who absolutely are called to have a ministry. Absolutely. And great, wonderful, do it. You do what God tells you to do. But I do wonder if we sometimes assume that because we're believers and because maybe God's given us something to say or write or sing about or create or something, that we assume that means this is my calling, this is my full-time work, this is what I need to do with my life. And it can be that, but it isn't always. In fact, I'd say it's probably less often than usual.
Yeah, I think that we need to be careful. This is something I grew up here, and we need to be careful not to assign value or more value to one or the other. You know, in the Bible, when God explains what a society looks like when he's king, when he's in control, it's only 1 in 12 tribes that is in ministry, that is serving the Lord. The rest of the population, 11/12 of the population, received their inheritance, received their land, and were farming and were producing. And so that in and of itself should clue us into the distribution that God is looking for. And the man-made importance that we give to one or the other is not in God's hierarchy. He didn't say one tribe was more important than the other 11, or those 11 were more important. In fact, when Jesus came to earth as a man, most of the time, so he's confronting lies and stuff like that. But when you look at what people he was, you know, confronting, he was confronting the religious people who were in authority, the religious people. And why was that? Because they were assigning importance to themselves. They were assigning, you know, significance to themselves. They were financially hurting people, and they were ascribing to themselves, you know, this authority that they didn't have, that they're the special people, that it's, you know, they're the people who have the time to study the word. They're the people who have all the answers. They're the people who I need to go to for my solutions. You know, Jesus is trying to say, hey, all who believe, I am the way, the truth, and the life. All who believe come through me to the Father. If you want to know the Father, come to me, come through me. And that's the revolution. That's the revolution of our faith, that every single individual has equal access to God, the Father, through a living knowledge of Yeshua, Jesus. And not that we have these hierarchies, not that we create these levels in our mind, you know, well, he's the pastor, he's the important one, you know, well, he's the worship leader, he's the whatever it is, you know.
It goes the other way around though too. Like we value ourselves. We often find our identity and our validation through what we do. And it can be through, you know, I'm a very successful lawyer, or I'm head doctor, or I'm whatever. We can attribute that same value to ourselves, not in ministry, but in the professional side as well. It's just as easy to do. But I think that the Christian culture, let's just call it that, puts a massive amount of value and emphasis on ministry life, and until it doesn't pay the bills, and then it's, well, go and get a real job. You know, it's very fickle.
Yeah, I think a good point to bring up is this idea that you know, we're in ministry or we're professionals, you know, and I think that juxtaposition is something that we wanted to delve into today, because in the work world, it feels quite natural to understand that we need to be, you know, quote unquote professional, and what that means, and you know, these standards that are set, you know. And I've met so many people and ministries that don't apply some of that into the ministry world, you know, like, well, we're in ministry, you know, like that in some way changes, you know, the measuring rod, if you like, you know, of how your work life works. And I think that it's really important to bring back into context that the work of the Lord is just as needing of our professionalism and our investment into knowledge and skills, you know, and those kind of things, just as much as, you know, you would invest in your credentials or your understanding, you know, in a secular career.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But it does have a flip side where you have like a professional pastor and an executive elder and all these things, which are just cringeworthy sometimes. But I remember when I was at university in London for 2 years, I attended a Hillsong church, which I know many people may, you know, turn off the podcast at this point. How can you just, I mean, how could you even? But it was an absolutely amazing experience for me. And it was exactly what I needed at that time. And one of the biggest things that it taught me was that it was to approach everything with that excellence and that high level of commitment to being the best that God's allowed us to be. And it wasn't, the thing that I loved about it was not that it was this kind of showy kind of, we're going to put on a big show today. It was never like that. It was really a beautiful atmosphere for me to be in for that time that I was there. And it was really impacting because I had been in so many church settings and congregational settings and all kinds of Christian settings where it was lacking. There was not this commitment to excellence, and it was very sloppy often. And like what you're saying, these standards weren't there, and there wasn't the same effort put into things as you would do. I mean, if we behaved like we did at church in an office, we'd be fired. Like, let's be real, it's not going to fly. So why would it fly here? And so I was really grateful to be in that environment where it was absolutely consistent between the two worlds in that respect. And it was a massive mind shift for me that this is actually being faithful. It's do it well. Like, if you're going to do it well to the best that we can. And that may be one guitar on a Sunday with one person leading worship, because that may be what you have. But it's not about putting a big show and having a huge system and having a ton of money and having a stage and it's not about that. It's about the commitment to excellence.
Yeah, I think that where it goes astray is when that becomes the most important thing,
right?
You know, where that becomes what we're striving for on, you know, and we leave grace behind and we leave developing people behind and that, because we just have to have the best and you know, all that kind of thing. But I think that it first starts with our own personal responsibility. So God has given us talents. Right? All of us, each and every one of us. We've also shared about the parable of the talents in this podcast before. But we need to invest in our skill, even though we have those talents. So we cannot kind of just rest back on our laurels, kind of like, well, my talent will carry me through or my ability. It is incumbent upon us to develop, to learn, to invest in our skill, so that when that opportunity arises, we're ready to meet that challenge. We're ready to meet that call with that spirit of excellence. And I think that it's important to recognize that and not to make that artificial separation or that divide between this is work, this is where there's professional development, this is where we invest in skills and abilities, and over here we just rely, you know, on I don't exactly know what, and so we do need to be led by the Holy Spirit. We do need to have these things, but we also need to recognize, you know, let's just take the role of a pastor, for example, you know, investing in counseling skills, for example, in actually taking a course online, and acquiring that knowledge, even if you won't become the counselor, just understanding that and having that ability to to handle people from a place of bringing in experience and knowledge that other people have accumulated, that's relating to my sphere of influence and my work in ministry.
Absolutely. I was just reminded of your picture that you spoke about in our previous episode about the shopping cart. I think it's the same thing here. You were talking about when you get married and you start adding in, but actually we all have a toolbox. It all comes with some automatic things in the box that God has naturally placed in us, and it's about keeping those tools sharp. But it may also be about adding tools to the box that we have to go out and learn. And they're not naturally there, but we have to acquire them. We have to build up our supply. And it may be that the only ones we actually use are the ones that came with the box or in the first place. It's our job to make sure that the toolbox is fully equipped and sharp. And I think we don't do that as much in the ministry world, because exactly what you said, they're just the God-given gift. And that's great and that's amazing and it's a brilliant start. But I think, what you've just been talking about, this is what I did in the first half of COVID. As I remember so clearly, and I think I even spoke about it somewhere on some podcast episode somewhere, about I was very, very determined to keep moving forward and that I wasn't going to be grounded just because I was grounded. And it was a very intentional thing in my life. I didn't just allow COVID to happen to me. I was very, very determined to keep moving forward however I could. And so I did do courses, I did do stuff, I did write some online things, I did a bunch of stuff at the very beginning until God started to speak about transitioning out. But, it's active waiting, isn't it? It's not allowing that season or being in ministry to dull your tools, to just sit there and get rusty, because you just don't know when God's going to say, right, today's the day you're going to take down a giant. Where's your slingshot? And you're like, where did I put it? I haven't used it in years. I haven't got a clue. Where do I even begin? I have to do 55 million practice shots before I'm ready. He picked up 5 pebbles. You know why he only took 5? Because he knew how to do it. He was practicing every day. He absolutely knew how to take aim. He was on it. He'd been investing in that gift. And that is what we should be doing. It may not be time to step up. He didn't know that day it was going to be the day. He went to deliver cheese to his brothers and he had no idea. I mean, if that had been me, I'd have been like scooping up the entire riverbed into my pouch because it's going to take me 1,200 times to get anywhere near him. So David was ready because he'd been investing. And that's what we should be doing, keeping those things sharp, those skills, those tools ready.
So good. It reminds me of this meeting that we just had here in our community house. We invited a bunch of young professionals for just a get together.
Another
just to
thing
invest,
we did together.
It's true. Just to invest into working people, not ministry people, working people in congregations here in the north. And not to harp on the Hebrew thing, but this beautiful thing came up with this, just connecting to what you were saying, with the word talent in Hebrew, which is kisharon, and that's the word talent, and that's what we have. And we were talking about what it is to be a believer and a professional, like this believer professional. So if you conjugate the word again in Hebrew, kisharon, this word, you get another word, which is mukhsharut, which means readiness, being ready, like you said. And then the third word, which is hachshara, which is skilled learning, what we were talking about, investing. And so you get these 3 words all tied into this one root. Kisharon, mukhsharut, and hachshara. And that was the definition of this professionalism as a believer. It is the talent, the God-given talent that he's given me to do whatever it is. It is the skilled learning that I invest into that talent. I don't just rely on the talent. I invest into skilled learning and increasing my skill. And I ready myself. I practice. I like you were saying, King David, he wasn't king then, he was shepherd boy. He was using this tool, this slingshot. He knew how to take aim. He knew how to use it. And that's why he was able to, step up to that moment and deliver and execute that God-given mandate for that moment.
Yeah.
And that's how we need to be looking at this.
Yeah.
We have a talent. We have things that God has given us. We need to look at investing, skilled learning. This reminds me of, I was on a ministry trip with this singer, and she's got a wonderful voice. She's really good. And I had never been away with her, so I'd never seen kind of her process from, getting ready to sing to, winding down from it. And she had spent a lot of time and invested in her voice, and warming up and in cooling down and in taking professional lessons and all this kind of stuff. Something I'm sorry to say I've never done. And it impressed me so much to see that. And I was talking to her about why, and she said, this is my tool, like my muscle. This is my, so just like let's say a professional athlete, okay? He has these skills, he has these abilities, but he is dedicated to the professionalism of that sport, which is what gets him to the place where he can reach to these incredible performances, you know. And so I think that we need to look at that in our lives.
Absolutely.
Both at work and in quote unquote ministry or the work of the Lord in our life, to hold that same standard for both.
Yeah. I'm thinking about David and, that process that he went through to step up to that moment with a slingshot. And I think what I just remembered about his whole experience with trying on Saul's armor. And I think that's actually a really good thing to just think about, because I think it's something that we do a lot in ministry, is especially with, let's just say, pastors. They're a pastor, so they must be good at this and this and this and this and this. And actually, they may not be. They may not be a gifted preacher and pastorally and administratively, if that's the word. And they may not be amazing at all these different things, but should absolutely be the pastor. I've definitely been in a congregation where that's been the case. You've got this person who is absolutely supposed to be leading, but they do not have a gift for preaching or teaching. And yet they're put there every week because that's what they should do, because they're a pastor. And I think it's the same thing can happen in both worlds. And I think there's a difference between skilled learning, like skilling up and investing in your tools and investing in your gifts and active waiting and all these things we've spoken about. There's a difference between that and trying on somebody else's armor, because you're essentially pretending to be the same shape as them, and it isn't going to fit you. And I think it's a really easy pit to fall into. I think in both worlds, in both ministry and professional world, you can very easily think, I should be that shape, so I'm going to try and be that and wear that and do that and behave like that. And then it doesn't quite work, and you have to kind of wiggle your way back out of it, and then realize, actually, I do have the skills here. And it, like David, he realized, actually, no, I don't need all this heavy stuff on me. I just need my slingshot, because that's the tool that's ready.
Yeah, that's so good. It got me thinking about something that I learned in my professional career, or secular is a better word to use, career. And it has to do with the power of team and the power of the people around you. This pastor who's put up there, and he has to be good at people and teaching and counseling and organizing and administration and
doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. This person that does all these things doesn't exist. And that's the power of unity, and that's the power of coming together. And it works for the secular world, and it works also for ministry. This one person does it all, one person can do it all, it doesn't actually deliver those great results. the CEOs and the managers who understand that they are not trying to be the best, they're not trying to be the greatest, but rather they surround themselves with people who have skills and abilities that they don't have, A, will grow from that because you grow from the people around you, and B, the results, the multiplication, the results of what that person can deliver will be so much greater because they have added in more people and they've allowed each person to shine in their area of strength. I remember that we were working on a conference here to equip local worshipers together with a team from Jerusalem. And so we had two teams that became, so we already had the dynamic of each team, and then those two teams now became one team to go forward. And I remember thinking, we hadn't worked together before, and I was looking at what this would look like, and could we truly come together, and how the differences of what we thought would be, the professional result of this event and this ministry would be compared to what they thought, professional outcomes and results. And it was beautiful to see that what happened was there was no pride, there was no grabbiness, there was no striving. And in fact, what we did was each kind of person took on this part that they were strong at, and it delivered so much more. Like I remember really looking back when we were kind of debriefing as our team, our own team, realizing how much more we were able to do and how much more impact there was because we had this extended team, and because they took on things that they were absolutely brilliant at. Could we have done what they did? Yes, but I don't think that it would have been, at that power, and also the amount of energy we would have had to invest in doing that compared to sharing the load. And God was gracious to us because we really had this beautiful unity. And so finding these like-minded people that you can build on together will increase the effectiveness and the spillover of that talent and that gift and that calling that God's given you.
Yeah, that's so good. I think really it all comes down to understanding your calling. And for some people, they may absolutely be called into ministry, and good for them. That's absolutely where they should be, and God will absolutely bless it and multiply it and all of those things. But if we're not, we shouldn't assume that we are because we're believers, number one. But many of us, and this is a new me, including myself in this us, have been called to the secular place and people. And I think it's really important, something I've been thinking a lot about, because this is new to me, this whole world of dealing with non-believers every day and having all these different kinds of conversations with people that I'm not used to having. It's definitely becoming clear to me that there is really a call to those people. And God's spoken a lot to me about how I can take his peace and his rest and his presence into these homes that I'm helping to grow and build and, design. And it's actually become a real, a mission to me. Like, I can go into a building site. The owners of this building site, the future people who will be living in this home, they're not there. I can do whatever I like. I can post prayers in the walls if I want to, but I can take his peace and rest, and I can commit that home and put it under his authority and under his rest and under his peace. And I can do that in a way that I never would get to do in ministry. I can take his presence. His presence would never be invited into that home if I wasn't taking it in. And I think that is really a huge thing to understand, that, if you're going into your office and you cannot for the light of day see why you're supposed to be there, the very, very minimum that you can take with you every day is this presence of God that I carry in me is not going to be in this office any other way. It's the absolute, very basic minimum that you can go in absolutely sure of every day. That's a massive shift in understanding.
Yeah. Bottom line, our work is our ministry. Our work is our worship. And God always has opportunities for us. I think that it's that understanding of kind of stripping away these labels that we put on things, these assigned values that we put on things, And that's how we can really see things in the way that God sees them. Because when you strip away your own, these goggles that we put on and we kind of label things and design things in the way that we find these boxes that we like, if you kind of think outside of that box for a minute, you're going to absolutely step into the opportunities to further the kingdom of God that God has for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one final thing that I would just ask is, there is a massive amount of release that comes to somebody like myself, who for years and years was in ministry and waiting for it to take off and waiting for it to become this big thing and waiting for it to provide. And there is a massive amount of release in understanding that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And maybe God might allow for you to have it on the side, and he may have a different thing for you to do during the day. Sometimes we put so much pressure on our ministry to become our whole life, and maybe that is not God's design. So we just want to bless you guys, whatever you do, whether you're in ministry, whether you're in a secular workplace, maybe you're in both. We pray a blessing over you, that you will be fully released into everything that God has for you in those places. And we'll see you next time.
Amen.
Thanks for stopping by, guys. Make sure you're subscribed so that you never miss an episode. And if you have loved this show, please leave us a rating.
Yeah, we'd so appreciate it. And share it with your friends and your family. We are so excited that you have joined the journey.